I don't know if you can justify or how you justify forcing my constituents to pay for EVs and EV infrastructure for coastal elites and wealthy people, but somehow you do.
Well, I need to point out that wealthy people were specifically excluded from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Secretary Buttigieg, since taking the role, you've traveled quite a bit, including private flights. How often do you take private flights?
So I assume by private flights you mean the use of government aircraft assigned to my agency. And I knew this might come up, so I brought some numbers.
And it was at this moment he knew he was screwed. So you do this long enough, you learn a couple of things. Number one, an insult is not a sufficient replacement for an argument. And two, when Pete Buttigieg prefaces his response with, "I thought this was going to come up, so I brought some numbers," you'd be as well just picking up a shovel and burying yourself, because it's only going one way.
Travel is in economy class aboard an airliner like everybody else. When we do it differently, it's often because it will save taxpayer money.
I want to get on.
I'm so glad you asked this, because
items.
I'm kind of excited to share some of the
Secretary
details.
Transportation Secretary was forced to sit in front of a panel of his GOP colleagues and listen to enlightening statements such as,
I don't know the percentage of atmospheric gases.
You don't know the percent of the atmosphere.
What I can tell you is that climate change is real. We got to do something about it.
Yeah, this one's
And
called
we've been-
autumn, sir. So
I'm sorry?
This one's called autumn right now, so yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't make out what you said, sir.
This climate change right now is called autumn, yes.
Yeah, that's the seasons changing, which respectively is not the same thing as the climate changing. And as somebody who is hoping to retire in the 2050s and who has kids who will be old enough to ask me as they're getting to their 30s, whether we did enough to deal with climate change or whether we just did what was convenient, I take that really seriously.
Reclaiming my time, thank you, Mrs. Secretary. The trillions and trillions we're going to cost our kids to chase a tiny percentage of CO2 will bankrupt all of us, and bankrupt our economy, and ship it to China for all the other reasons. So I yield back, Mr.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman.
Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. You can see that I serve here in Congress with some of the greatest minds of the 19th century. Thank you.
But it was during a particular exchange with Representative Burleson regarding his usage of government transportation. And this is something that Pete Buttigieg has responded to before, so he came receipt ready. And, well, just watch the rest.
Secretary Buttigieg, since taking the role, you've traveled quite a bit, including private flights. How often do you take private flights?
So I assume by private flights you mean the use of government aircraft assigned to my agency. And I knew this might come up, so I brought some numbers. Since getting this job, I have taken 600, these are estimates, give or take a couple, but I've taken 638 flights.
And any of those commercial?
Say about that?
Any of those commercial?
607 of them were commercial, 10 of them were on military aircraft such as Air Force One, and 21 of them were on FAA aircraft, representing about 3% of the flights.
What was there was a Freedom of Information request made of your office to reveal the costs of the travel. Have you provided those costs?
I'd have to check back with the office to see how on the traffic, but I can tell you that, yeah, we're going to comply with all
it's
FOIA
been months
requests.
and you've not provided the financial numbers for that travel.
Okay. Again, I can check on the status of a FOIA request, but I can also...
You'll commit to providing that information?
We will always comply with FOIA. But I appreciate the chance to discuss this, because I can't help but get the sense that some people want to make it sound as if I don't
Mr.
travel most of
Secretary.
the time on commercial aircraft, which of course is untrue.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, I think the irony for most people in my district is that they're being told that they're going to have to convert to electric vehicles to reduce their carbon footprint, and yet not everyone gets to travel the way that you do.
Just once again, the way I usually travel is in economy class aboard an airliner like everybody else. When we do it differently, it's often because it will save taxpayer money.
I want to get on.
I'm so glad you asked this, because
items.
I'm kind of excited to share some of the
Secretary.
details.
And as I said, this is something Buttigieg has responded to before on Fox News of all places, and the end result was the same on air. For those of us who pay attention to modern day American politics, there are few more prepared than Pete Buttigieg.
You give us some insight into what she might say to justify why she was for Medicare for all then and is not for it now, for example.
Well, there's a classic parlor game of trying to find a little bit of daylight between running mates. And if people want to play that game, we could look into why an evangelical Christian like Mike Pence wants to be on a ticket with the president caught with a porn star, or how he feels about the immigration policy that he called unconstitutional before he decided to team up with Donald Trump. If folks want to play that game, we could do it all night. But I think what most Americans want to hear about is, are our families going to be better protected than they have been by this president who's failed to secure America in the face of one of the most dangerous things ever to happen to our country?
Will the question be answered of what?
So if you're going to come at him with questions, you have to expect that there's a full-winded response you're getting.
Your husband tweeted after Justice Brett Kavanaugh left a Washington restaurant due to protesters. The tweet reads, "Sounds like he just wanted some privacy to make his own dining decisions." Is that appropriate, sir?
Look, when public officials go into public life, we should expect two things. One, you should always be free from violence, harassment, and intimidation. And two, you're never going to be free from criticism or peaceful protest, people exercising their First Amendment rights. Okay. And that's what happened in this case. Remember, the justice never even came into contact with these protesters, reportedly didn't see or hear them. And these protesters are upset because a right, an important right, that the majority of Americans support was taken away.
So while we're all aware of the incompetence of the GOP, I just struggle to believe that the aides allowed GOP members to walk into this hearing with a butter knife. Because as you will see, it only got worse and worse.
These are not market forces. This is the government funding the destruction of our own automotive industry. And I hope you know that approximately 2/3 of EV owners make over $100,000 a year. My bosses don't make that. I don't know if you can justify or how you justify forcing my constituents to pay for EVs and EV infrastructure for coastal elites and wealthy people, but somehow you do.
Well, I need to point out that wealthy people were specifically excluded from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, I just gave you the number. Do you dispute that 2/3 of EV owners are owned by people over 100,000 that make over 100,000? Did you dispute that?
Yeah, the first EVs, of course, were.
Do you dispute that?
No, but that number's going down.
Those are the facts. It doesn't matter if they're going down now.
Why were you
the folks
against
that
cutting
I
the price of
represent
EVs?
can't afford them today, sir.
Why were you against cutting their costs?
All these factors. I'm not against cutting their costs. The market should do it. But you want the government, you want my taxpayers to pay to cut the cost, which isn't cutting the cost.
If you were of the view,
subsidizing
respectfully,
the cost.
Congressman,
Sir,
if you were of
with
the
all
view
these
that there
factors
should be no
combined,
subsidy to propulsion
all these
vehicles,
factors
then are you against
combined
oil and gas
mean
subsidies?
that for
You
every
believe that oil
EV
and gas
sold, sir,
subsidies
at a loss, that the cost of the, as my colleague on the other side, the gas-guzzling pickup truck is higher now to pay for the loss as you kill your administration, and you in particular, kill the auto industry. And I'll remind you, in 2008, after the financial crisis, the federal government bailed out this industry. So while you're here today, will you commit and will you pledge to oppose any effort to bail out the auto industry after you force it into bankruptcy again? Will you do that today, sir?
Congressman, I got started in politics when
I guess the answer is
the
no. I
Indiana
yield the
factory was at risk of being shut down because an elected official in my state tried to block the administration from saving Chrysler. I got involved and stood with the UAW to save those jobs, and I'll always be with auto jobs being preserved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, would you like to finish your statement?
Sure, thank you, and I'll try to be as concise as I can. There are some people who I suppose believe there should be no subsidies for anything involving transportation. And I assume in the spirit of philosophical consistency, they would be against subsidizing oil and gas, as well as being against subsidizing Americans being able to afford an EV. There are others who believe that we should force Americans to be in the technology of the past forever. And then there's this administration, which recognizes that the world is moving to EVs, with or without us. And those EVs are either going to be made by Chinese workers or they're going to be made by American workers. And we respect the UAW standing up at the dawn of a new chapter in the automotive industry that created my hometown to make sure that those are not just American jobs, but good-paying American jobs.
Hey Midas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.